See this scene here? This is a picture of a line of people trying to cross the border to escape hunger and poverty. And no, they are not immigrants trying to enter the United States. Nor are they refugees fleeing war in the Middle East. This is Venezuela, and that line is the entrance to Brazil. Every day, entire families pass through here on foot. Tired people carrying bags, children, little food, and almost no certainty of what they will find on the other side. The only certainty was that they could no longer stay. But do you know what is most unbelievable? A few years ago, this story was the opposite. Venezuela was once the most coveted country in South America. Rich, stable, modern, a dream destination. And now? Now it's a country that expels millions. How did this happen? That's what we're going to tell you now. The crisis in Venezuela has forced millions of people from their homes, and many of them ended up in Brazil. More precisely in Pacaraima, a small town with just over 20,000 inhabitants located in the far north of Roraima, right on the border between the two countries. In recent years, this small municipality has become the main point of entry for those trying to escape economic collapse, street violence, and a complete lack of prospects. The city has had to learn to deal with this constant flow of people, with urgent humanitarian needs and stories that arrive without pause. As soon as they cross the border, these people go through what is known as Operation Welcome, a task force coordinated by the Brazilian government in partnership with the UN and the armed forces. This structure organizes entry into the country, offers temporary shelter, vaccines, food, provisional documentation, and even transfers families to other cities, where they can try to start over with a minimum of dignity. According to data from international organizations, more than 7.7 million Venezuelans have left the country since 2015. It is the largest exodus in Latin American history, and it only exists because within Venezuela, life has become practically unsustainable. But to understand how it all began, we need to go back a few decades. Because there was a time when Venezuela was the exact opposite of what it is today. Between the 50s and the 80s, Venezuela experienced what many people still refer to as its golden age. The economy wasn't just growing, it was exploding. Money circulated easily, the currency was stable, and oil seemed like an inexhaustible source of wealth. There was so much oil, so much profit, so much investment that the country ended up earning the nickname Saudi Venezuela, a direct comparison with Saudi Arabia to show the size of the bonanza they were experiencing. The gross domestic product per capita was the fourth highest in the world, surpassing European nations, including countries such as Germany and France. Caracas, the capital, looked like a first-world city. Huge buildings, wide avenues, high consumption, and a lifestyle that made any Latin American neighbor jealous. Consumption was so rampant that traveling to Miami became routine for a large part of the population. And there, Venezuelans became known for a phrase that became almost a stereotype, Dame dos, which means give me two. They didn't think twice before taking everything in duplicate: 2 pairs of sneakers, 2 TVs, 2 cameras. The exchange rate was so favorable that it was more worthwhile to buy in the United States than at home. And consumption was not limited to imported goods and tickets to Miami. Venezuela even ranked among the top countries in the world in whiskey consumption. It was unbridled ostentation. It was as if the country had entered into a never-ending party, with lots of luxury, designer brands, imported drinks, and cheap dollars. The most incredible thing is that, while today Venezuelans are fleeing their own country in search of dignity, at that time it was the opposite. People from Spain, still living under Francisco Franco's dictatorship, came en masse to Venezuela in search of opportunity. There were high salaries, guaranteed jobs, and a general sense of stability and a bright future. Venezuela seemed unstoppable, but this feeling of endless prosperity was a trap, a golden trap, and no one saw it coming until everything started to change. Contrary to what many people think, Venezuela's crisis did not begin with Hugo Chavez, nor with Nicolás Maduro. This story begins much earlier, at the beginning of the 20th century, when the country decided to bet everything on oil. The commercial discovery took place in 1914 and brought with it a seductive idea of easy wealth. Oil became the absolute star of the economy, and the government jumped headfirst into this venture as if it were the only possible answer to the country's problems. To give you an idea, 95% of everything that drove the economy came from oil. In other words, almost the entire country was supported by a single pillar, and any crack in that pillar would have a ripple effect. Agriculture, which had once been the engine of the economy, was neglected. Food production plummeted. Domestic industry barely had a chance to get off the ground, and Venezuela began to import almost everything: food, clothing, medicine, technology. What kept this system running was black gold, and black gold alone. As long as the price per barrel was high, no one complained. Money flowed, social programs grew, salaries increased, and it seemed that everything was going well. There was a sense of stability, and this illusion became even stronger in the 70s, when international crises caused the price per barrel to rise like never before. Venezuela was swimming in money. The government inflated the public sector, increased the number of civil servants, created gigantic projects, distributed resources, and promised an even brighter future. The population believed it. After all, everything seemed to be improving at the same time, but the price per barrel never stays high forever. And you know that saying, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. Well, that's what happened. When it plummeted at the end of the decade, the fall was brutal. The country was bloated, indebted, with weakened sectors and no structure to withstand the blow. Prosperity vanished almost overnight, and that's when the system began to crack. In the 80s and 90s, Venezuela tried everything. It cut spending, made fiscal adjustments, took out loans abroad, and knocked on the door of the International Monetary Fund. But nothing seemed to work. Poverty skyrocketed, inequality grew, and the population completely lost confidence in politicians, institutions, and any promises. It was in this climate of disillusionment, anger, and exhaustion that a new name emerged on the scene. A military man with a direct, popular style of speech, who talked like the people and promised to break with everything that was there. A man named Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez was already a well-known name in Venezuela. In 1992, he attempted a coup d'etat, but the plan went wrong and he ended up in prison. However, his time in jail became a stage, and when he was released from prison, he was practically a celebrity. 2 years later, he began to organize his candidacy. He promised to restore Bolivarian values, that is, the ideas of independence and social justice inspired by the hero Simón Bolívar, and to fight corruption, reduce inequality, and return power to the people. And his speech worked. In 1998, he was elected with a landslide victory. The people saw him as their only way out, and the timing again seemed perfect. As soon as he took office, oil entered another cycle of international appreciation. The price per barrel rose sharply, and the country's revenue exploded. Chavez seized the moment. He created social programs, subsidized food, expanded access to health care and education, and boosted domestic consumption. Poverty fell, his charisma skyrocketed, and Chavismo came to be seen by many as a successful popular revolution. Everything was great, right? The problem is that Chavez doubled down on dependence on oil. He imports almost everything, reduces domestic productive investment, and centralizes political power. Over time, charisma turned into control. Like anyone with an appetite for control, Chavez began to take everything into his own hands. And for that to happen, he had to change the rules of the game, one by one, always in a way that left the path increasingly clear for him. He created laws to extend his own terms in office, attacked broadcasters who criticized him, shut down radio and TV stations, persecuted opponents, weakened Congress, and placed allies in key positions. All this in the name of the so-called Bolivarian Revolution. He said he needed power to protect the people from internal and external enemies. Meanwhile, the public sector grew relentlessly. The number of ministries increased, spending skyrocketed, and state control over everything only grew. But popular support remained strong. To give you an idea of the extent of this power, in 2002, Chavez suffered an attempted military coup. He was removed from office. Do you know how long he was out? 2 days. Just 2 days. The people took to the streets, the military split, and he returned to the Miraflores palace in the arms of his allies. A warning that Chavismo was not just a government, it was a phenomenon. But no phenomenon can withstand economic collapse on its own. Starting in 2012, the price of oil plummeted again, and with it, the Venezuelan economy also collapsed. There was a shortage of food, toilet paper, medicine. There was a shortage of everything. Inflation skyrocketed. The currency practically disappeared. Social programs began to stall, and the people began to experience déjà vu, the same collapse that had happened before, only now, much worse. And it was at that very moment that the biggest blow struck. The president's cancer came to light. When Hugo Chavez's health deteriorated due to cancer, everyone knew that sooner or later he would have to choose someone to take his place. What no one expected was the name he pulled out of his hat. Instead of appointing an experienced politician, a strong ally, or a popular leader, Chavez appointed a former bus driver and union leader named Nicolás Maduro. He had no charisma, no relevant electoral track record, but he had one quality that weighed more than any resume: absolute loyalty to Chavismo. Chavez even called Maduro a tremendous chancellor, a dedicated diplomat, but the truth is that his track record already showed something else. As foreign minister, Maduro became known for his inflammatory statements against the United States and for cozying up to authoritarian regimes around the world. He was provocative, hostile, and made a point of creating tension. In one of his most memorable statements, he called U.S. Deputy Secretary of State John Negroponte a little functionary. Even with this profile, he managed to win the election, but it was close. With a narrow margin, Maduro took over a country in tatters, divided, with the economy on the brink of collapse, and the population increasingly disillusioned. And instead of correcting the mistakes of the past, he decided to deepen them all. What was a crisis turned into a collapse? Under Nicolás Maduro's leadership, the crisis ceased to be merely economic and became humanitarian as well. Inflation exploded at a rate that seemed like fiction. In 2018, it exceeded 1,700,000%. That's right, 1,700,000. Money completely lost its value. It took a bag full of bills to buy a simple loaf of bread. The minimum wage was not enough to buy even half a kilo of meat. The currency had to be changed, cutting zeros and reissuing bills more than once. And it wasn't just money that disappeared. The supermarket shelves were empty. Rice, flour, milk, everything became a luxury item. And worse, it wasn't just food. There was a shortage of medicine. There was a shortage of syringes. There was a shortage of gauze. There was a shortage of basic hospital equipment. Doctors improvised with whatever they could find, often without electricity, without water, without anesthesia. Scenes reminiscent of war zones became part of everyday life. Malnourished children became routine in the news. Some fainted in schools due to lack of food. In 2017, a national survey of Venezuelan universities revealed that Venezuelans lost an average of 11 kilograms of body weight in 1 year due to the sheer difficulty of eating properly. And this was no longer exclusive to poor regions. It also affected areas that were once rich, urbanized, and developed. Extreme poverty knocked on the door of more than 90% of the population. It was an unprecedented collapse, and the direct result of this was what we showed at the beginning of the video. But as if that weren't enough, Maduro managed to go even further. While the people were starving and the country was plunged into blackouts, Nicolás Maduro decided to tighten his grip even further. He began to use the entire apparatus of the state to stay in power at any cost. The judiciary was rigged, parliament was emptied, the opposition was hunted down, politicians were arrested, newspapers were shut down, television channels were silenced, protests, they were suppressed with tear gas, rubber bullets, and imprisonment, sometimes even with real bullets. Paramilitary groups emerged to intimidate anyone who criticized the regime. They acted freely in the streets, often alongside the security forces. In practice, the country became a dictatorship, masquerading as a democracy. But the repression did not stop at politics. The UN, the United Nations, even sent an independent mission to the country, and the report that came out of it was devastating. According to the document, the Maduro government committed physical and psychological abuses and serious human rights violations. It used the state itself to intimidate, torture, and silence. Today, it is the military that keeps Nicolás Maduro in power. A closed, loyal group that, in exchange for privileges, runs the show behind the scenes. And those who oppose, they are silenced, literally. And it was in this scenario of economic collapse, political repression, and mass exodus that the embargo came about, which many people repeat without knowing exactly what it means. The embargo, in practice, consists of economic sanctions, a type of punishment imposed by other countries. In the case of Venezuela, the United States began to apply these sanctions more aggressively in 2017, after allegations of electoral fraud, violent repression, and systematic human rights violations. Initially, the sanctions targeted specific high-ranking individuals. They froze accounts, blocked assets, and restricted travel. But over time, the siege tightened. Sectoral sanctions were imposed, directly affecting Venezuela's most sensitive sector, oil. PDVSA, Venezuela's state-owned oil company, was cut off from the U.S. financial system. This meant that it could no longer sell or trade freely with U.S. banks and companies, obtain credit on the international market, purchase parts, or enter into contracts with suppliers. It was a direct blow to the heart of the country's economy. And yes, these sanctions made the situation much worse. But it's important to say one thing loud and clear. The embargo did not create the crisis. It did not invent hyperinflation, nor shortages, nor the collapse of the healthcare system. The crisis had already been going on for decades. The embargo only accelerated the decline. And the craziest thing is that all this is happening in one of the richest places on the continent. Truly rich. Beneath the ground lies the largest oil reserve in the world. That's right, in the entire world. But it's not just oil. Venezuela also has gold in absurd quantities, diamonds, natural gas, strategic minerals, and rare earth elements, which are raw materials essential for manufacturing cell phones, electric cars, computers, and solar panels. In addition, the country has fertile agricultural soil, abundant fresh water, preserved forests, and a privileged geographical position. It's right next to the Caribbean, close to the United States, in the middle of strategic trade routes, a true logistical dream for any country. In other words, what was never lacking was wealth. What was and is lacking is management, planning, political stability, and economic diversification. There was no one with the courage to prepare the country to live beyond the oil barrel. The crisis that fell on Venezuelans did not arise overnight. It was built up over decades, and so the question remains, one that no one can answer with certainty. With all that Venezuela still has, will this country one day be able to transform this wealth into quality of life? Or will the wealth remain underground while the people struggle to put food on the table? So, did you already know this whole story about Venezuela? Did you know that the crisis began well before the Chavista governments? Tell us in the comments what surprised you most about this video. If you liked the content, leave your like, share it, and of course, don't forget to activate the new hyper feature. This helps the channel gain visibility and continue bringing you these unbelievable journeys through our beautiful world. See you next time.